Bender Bending Rodriguez, everyone's favorite foul-mouthed, cigar-smoking, beer-chugging criminal robot. Bender is a fan favorite, and for good reason. He's used super effectively as comic relief in just about every single episode of Futurama, and his penchant for living a life of excess is always fun to watch. There are almost too many Bender-centric episodes to count, but strangely enough, there are a good chunk of Bender stories that are weirdly philosophical. On its face, making the robot have the most existential crises in the series is a really funny idea, but I also think it just works really well. Bender was created. He's technically a utility, a tool, yet he seems to have complete agency. And Bender is a character who is constantly yearning for more, with goals and dreams of grandeur. So let's break down Bender's constant search for meaning and what it means for him as a character.
Let's go already!
All the way back in season 1, we start to see Bender's love of all things excess. Sure, he drinks because it powers his fuel cells, but why does he smoke?
They make me look cool.
In Hell is Other Robots, we see Bender get hooked on electricity, basically a drug parallel for robots. This completely derails his life until he's saved by robotology, a robot religion. But before too long, Bender falls back into his sleazy ways, which leads him to the literal robot hell. For the first time anyways. While this episode doesn't have overtly philosophical overtones, I do think it's pretty interesting that they put the robot in the middle of the first religious storyline in the series, and ultimately, I think it's an idea they latched onto that informed some of Bender's later story. But the question is, why does Bender live the life of a criminal? Why does he constantly smoke and partake in dangerous activities that are, as he puts it,
counterindicated by my operations manual?
The inescapable thing about Bender is that he really is a machine, basically an appliance. Bender is mass-produced, so there are tons of other bending units just like him. We even meet one in the series, Flexo. Bender's entire existence is one of uniformity, so his desire to actually stand out and be unique is a smart and fun character choice. But it also seems to be the main thing that drives him in almost everything he does. In fact, we see these desires expressed blatantly in both Anthology of Interest episodes, where characters can literally ask the what-if machine anything they want and see it play out. In the first, Bender asks this:
what if I was 500 feet tall?
In this what-if scenario, we even see that Giant Bender is built by smaller versions of himself. He basically truly becomes the most massive and unique version of a bending unit possible. It's almost a power fantasy, which kind of comes into play later in the series. In the second one, Bender asks about this scenario.
I want to know what would happen if I were human. We don't have emotions, and sometimes that makes me very sad.
Humans are all unique and have emotions and free will, something Bender desperately wants as a mass-produced robot. And though this episode shows that Bender maybe can't be trusted with that kind of flexibility, this once again showcases Bender's genuine desire to stand out. It's also funny that both of these what-if scenarios end with Bender's dramatic pleas for humans to understand his lifestyle, followed shortly by his death. There are so many examples of Bender's actions being driven by his desire to differentiate himself from his mass-produced counterparts. Why does Bender smoke? It makes him look cool. He's the only bending unit to do that. Why does he commit crimes? He's desperate for the attention that comes with notoriety. Why does he want to be a folk singer? He wants the fame that comes with being a musician, and he wants to have lived a colorful life of unique experiences that are worth singing about. Why does he want to be a famous chef? Robots can't even taste, so this is a unique title, and there are likely no other robots who can cook. Bender jumps at any chance to be famous, idolized, or remembered. In Fear of a Bot Planet, he nearly sold out his friends to become an outspoken human hater. In Lesser of Two Evils, he tried to steal the priceless Gemerald from the Miss Universe pageant. In Bendin' in the Wind, he became an outspoken advocate for broken robots and toured the country with Beck. In the 30% Iron Chef, he challenges Elzar to the Iron Chef competition. In Bender Should Not Be Allowed on TV, he completely took over all my circuits when he was cast as Calculon's son, Antonio Calculon Jr. In Beast with a Billion Backs, he's desperate to discover and join the infamous League of Robots, an incredibly exclusive club. In Overclockwise, Bender overclocks his own processor and becomes one of the most powerful machines to exist. The list really just goes on and on. So let's talk about A Pharaoh to Remember, which isn't one of my favorite episodes, but it really brings to the forefront Bender's desire to be seen and remembered. The episode starts off showcasing Bender's many attempts to gain notoriety, first through theft, but to Bender's disappointment, those crimes are blamed on someone else. Next, he spray paints a huge mural of himself, only for the building to be destroyed. Next, his friends hold a mock funeral for him, which is almost entirely disappointing to Bender. In fact, the only single thing that Bender liked about his own funeral was the professor's eulogy, where he explains that the materials that make up Bender are actually slightly different than other bending units.
Bender had a 0.04% nickel impurity.
This seems so deeply impersonal and methodical, but Bender specifically likes this the most because it quantifiably proves that he is in fact different than his bending unit counterparts on a molecular level.
It's what made me, me.
The rest of the episode has the crew enslaved on a planet that is much like ancient Egypt, and even as a slave, you see that Bender tries to stand out as the hardest working and most impressive one of the bunch. And when the opportunity arises, he becomes the planet's new pharaoh, and even as ruler, his entire motivation is to be remembered for generations through a massive statue.
Remember me! Remember me!
And I think that ultimately Bender's persistent drive to be remembered or find fame or gain notoriety or even just look cool all boils down to his own personal search for meaning in his life. This is why they tend to give him the most philosophical stories. That's why in the episode Free Will Hunting, the idea that he does not have free will of his own is so devastating to Bender. When he discovers that his actions are merely pre-programmed into him, it completely takes away from that unique factor, the things that make Bender who he is. None of those things had anything to do with him or his own decision making. To Bender, this is the worst news he could get. He'd rather be charged with a felony than admit that he has no free will. Now, we can of course argue whether or not the show truly portrays Bender as having free will or not. I personally think it does, but I still appreciate the existential crisis Bender goes through in Free Will Hunting. But if we're gonna talk about Bender's existential nature, there are a few episodes we've gotta talk about, and the biggest is Godfellas. In this absolute classic episode, Bender is launched into space and doomed to float forever. On his journey, he's hit by an asteroid that yields life, basically becoming their god.
All bow before the great Metal Lord!
At first, Bender takes advantage of his new power and asks them to distill booze for him to power his fuel cells. They succeed, but the process kills and maims many of Bender's inhabitants, and it attracts organized crime, throwing the entire society into chaos. Bender tries a more hands-on approach and saves a small child from drowning, which leads to the entire society praying and begging Bender to answer their prayers. This leads the people that live on Bender's backside to feel neglected, creating an all-out war on Bender that ends in the quick extinction of these small folks. Shortly after this, Bender actually meets God. Or, well, not God, really.
But the remains of a computerized space probe that collided with God.
Yeah, in this episode, Bender meets God and becomes God, so basically Futurama inspired David and Prometheus. Futurama, I think, has a pretty nice little take on God. Regardless of what you believe, you can appreciate the tightrope they walked here. It's a nice little philosophical conversation, but the important thing is that the conversation helps Bender come to terms with what happened to his worshippers. After his little friends go apocalyptic, Bender is super distraught, wondering if he could have saved them from their sad fate. And I think one of the most important takeaways here, especially for Bender, is that he had formed a relationship with these folks. While Bender has over and over again looked for ways to be remembered, to leave a lasting impact, the things that really do leave a lasting impact for him are his relationships. In fact, the only way that he's saved and sent back to Earth in this episode is because of the strongest friendship he has with Fry, who gets God's attention while lamenting the loss of his best friend.
I wish I had Bender back.
And ultimately, I think the place that Bender truly has found meaning throughout Futurama is in his relationships. After Godfellas in the revival seasons, there are 3 more Futurama episodes that really take Bender down a philosophical path: Lethal Inspection, Ghost in the Machines, and the aforementioned Free Will Hunting. Lethal Inspection and Ghost in the Machines actually work pretty well as a pair. In some ways, Ghost in the Machines is a sequel. Lethal Inspection's existential crisis for Bender comes when he learns that he doesn't have a functioning backup unit, meaning if his body were to cease functioning, he could not be uploaded into a new body. So basically, Bender is now coping with that same existential dread we all face. We're all gonna die someday. Unless...
Welcome to the Head Museum.
This is too much to take for Bender, who wishes he had never been built instead.
Anything less than immortality is a complete waste of time.
Bender blames the mysterious Inspector 5 for this blunder, the person who inspected him at the factory when he was built. Bender forms an unlikely team-up with Hermes, and the two of them investigate who Inspector 5 might be. Their adventure brings them to the central bureaucracy and eventually to Mexico, but every lead they get is a dead end. Throughout this adventure, something interesting happens. Bender and Hermes become pretty close. An unlikely pairing, yeah, but they go through a lot together and clearly form a bond.
Hermes, remember that flock of bats? I sure do. That was fun.
This all goes back to what I said about Bender finding meaning in relationships. Throughout this adventure, he's going through yet another existential crisis, pondering life's hardest questions. And while doing so, he forms a strong friendship with somebody he didn't expect to. That is meaningful, and it's made all the more impactful with the really impressive twist in the end, when we learn that Inspector 5 was Hermes all along, and he chose to allow Bender to live without a backup unit. Damn, this is a good episode. Fly, little bird. Ghost in the Machines kind of leads us to a similar place, but through a different adventure. The story is framed around Fry having the opportunity to either save a robot or human from death, and he chooses the human. Bender takes exception to the fact that Fry thinks human life is worth more than robot life. So when Bender actually dies, he makes a deal with the devil that he can be brought back from the dead, but only if he scares Fry to death. He becomes a robot ghost who can inhabit and control electronic devices, and Fry goes a bit mad dealing with all of the electronic devices haunting him, moving off-world to an Amish planet. In the end, Bender actually inhabits the robot devil's body and saves Fry's life while sacrificing the robot devil in the process. He sort of goes through that same scenario Fry dealt with at the beginning of the episode. But ultimately, what I love about this is that it once again shows that Bender's meaning in the world stems from his relationships to those he cares about.
I saved my friend. As far as I'm concerned, I won.
He is willing to save his best friend, even if it means he'll have to spend eternity in robot hell. And in the end, I think we see Bender form these surprising relationships all across the series. Whether it's the obvious friendships like with Fry, or his short-lived relationship with Amy, or a sincere bond through an adventure with Hermes, or watching over his tiny worshippers, or his conversation with God himself, or these lovable orphans that he failed to exploit, or even his own son.
I knew you'd come back!
Here you go.
No, not that one. The other son, Ben.
Just remember, your daddy loves you.
So much of Bender's best character development comes with the building of his personal relationships. In fact, if you go back to his very first appearance, you can argue that the forming of these relationships completely saved Bender's life. When we meet Bender, he's in line at a suicide booth, but we've since learned that unbeknownst to Bender, he does not have a backup unit. Fry and Bender survive this encounter and grab a drink. After that, Bender says he's going back to the suicide booth, to which Fry asks him if he wants to be friends.
You really want a robot for a friend?
Yeah, ever since I was 6.
And the rest is history. If Bender had never met Fry, he probably wouldn't have existed past the first episode. The answer to Bender's search for meaning truly was right there in the pilot of the show. I love all of the existential and philosophical adventures Bender goes on throughout the series. Only one character has become a god and then met God. 2 gods, actually. Not to mention his weird relationship with the robot devil. But in the end, Bender's highest and lowest moments all relate to his bonds and friendships. And for a character constantly searching for meaning in the world, I think that's pretty nice.
I should have understood how someone can love an inferior creature, because I love you.
But what do you think about Bender's existential journeys in Futurama? Was the real meaning of life and the friends he made along the way? Give me your thoughts below in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because there's lots more Futurama videos coming, guys, I promise. Peace.
Johnny Two